Hello, and welcome to part 2 of the Photoshop tutorial series. So, today we are going to be creating a storyboard. Now, storyboards are incredibly important because they help us break down the process of any given scenario. Now, here is an example of what we will be making. This will be a storyboard for making a cup of tea. So the storyboard is broken down into 8 different components, and I'm going to teach you how to create this storyboard. Now, the storyboard can actually be about any topic, as long as you're able to break down the scenario into a series of components or a process. So, let's get started. We're going to be making a new document, so I'm going to go up again to File, go New, and once again, this document will be an A3 image. So we're going to go ahead now and just quickly change the parameters of the document. Let's just make sure that it says pixels here. We want to make sure it's actually millimeters for both. So for the width, we're going to say 420 mils, and for the height, we're going to say 297. And just remember as well, because we're working with print, we want to make the resolution 300 pixels per inch. And then we're going to hit OK. And here is our new document. So, before we start creating content in this document, what we're going to do is create some nice spacing around the edge of the document. And this is called a bleed. So I'm going to go ahead now and create a 5mm border around the perimeter of the image. I'm going to make sure my rulers are enabled. If your rulers aren't there, make sure to hit Control R, and that will give you your rulers. So, like last time, what you do is you click on the ruler, hold down the mouse button, and drag down into the document, like so. So I'm just going to quickly create a 5mm bleed. Okay, and here we go. We have our bleed. Now, once we've finished putting in our bleed around the edge of the document, we're just going to quickly go ahead and make sure we save the file before we start. So once again, it's pretty easy. Just go to File, the top left-hand corner, go Save As, and I'm going to call this Storyboard. Okay, that's the name of the file, and just make sure for the format you pick Photoshop.psd and hit Save. Okay, so let's start making the cells for the storyboard. So, we're going to be making a storyboard with 8 separate images. And in order to create these images, we're going to create a series of rounded rectangles to place the images into. So now, we're going to go ahead and go to the left-hand side of the screen, and there's a little tool button here. It's 2 down from the T. That's the best way to sort of describe it. 2 down from the T, there is a path shape tool. Now, if you left-click on that tool, you can see it gives you a series of shape tools. Rectangle tool, rounded rectangle tool, ellipse tool, and so on. So now we're going to be creating a rectangle with rounded edges, so we're going to pick the rounded rectangle tool. Here we go. I'm going to go ahead now and create some shapes. So as you can see, my rounded rectangle tool is selected, and what's happened is that at the top of the window, you get a series of parameters you can use to alter this rounded rectangle. So if I go ahead now and draw a square, I'm going to hold down Shift as well to make sure the square is even, like so. And then we get ourselves a rounded rectangle. Now you can go ahead and change a few things. So for example, I can change the fill, make that green maybe. So the fill is the inside of the shape. We can pick stroke, which is the edge of the shape, like so. And then we can do things like change the thickness of the outline. For example, I can go 50 and see how thick it is. I'll put it back to maybe 10, like so. And then I can change the radius. Now the radius is changing how rounded the corners are of the shape. So for example here I can go to 10. Like so. I can go to maybe 50. Like so. Or maybe I can get really carried away and go up to 200. So I quite like the shape here of this rounded rectangle. So what I'm going to do is just basically delete the other ones. I'm going to do this in the layers window, drag it to the trash. And so basically I want to create a rounded rectangle using these parameters here. But we're going to quickly just change the color to make it a little bit more useful. So just remember to make sure the rounded rectangle tool is selected. Now I'm going to go here and change a few things. So for example, the fill, which once again is the inside of the square. I'm going to click that. Now we want to make that transparent or invisible. So what I'm going to do is click on this button here. It's the white rectangle with a red line through it, and that means the fill will be empty. So I'm going to click on that. Okay, like so. And then for the stroke, which is the outline, I want to make that black. So I'm going to click the stroke here and pick black. Like so. Right, so we have our rounded rectangle here. So I'm just going to place it in the center using V for move. Just place it into the center here like so. Just want to make it a little bit bigger, so I'm going to go Control T to transform and Shift Alt to resize. That's a bit better. And then I'm going to just make the stroke around the outside of the rounded rectangle. It's still a little bit thinner. So I'm going to put it down to maybe 7, like so. Okay, we are ready to go. Okay, so our rectangle is ready. Now we can start importing images into the document. So I'm going to go ahead now and go File, Open. Now this will be a little bit different for you because your images might be in a different place. But for me, this is where they are. I'm going to click on the first image here. I've called 01. I'm going to go that and go Open. And so now the image has been opened in a new document. But I want to bring it into the main storyboard. So I'm just going to go Control A for Select All. You'll see the mark here on the edge. I'm going to go Control C to copy. Then I'm going to go back to my storyboard document, which is, if you can pick it right here, up in the left side. I'll click on that. And then I'm going to go ahead and go Control V to paste, and it should paste in the image. All right, there you go. Okay, so we have our image pasted into the main document. It's just a little bit too big on the page, so I'm going to go ahead and just make it a little bit smaller. I'm just going to go Control minus to zoom out. And just remember, guys, you can go Control minus to zoom out and Control plus to zoom in. I'm just going to zoom out just a little bit here. I'm going to go and hit Control T to transform again, like so. You can see the transform tool around the edge of the image. And I'm going to go, once again, Shift and Alt to resize it. I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller, like so. I'm just going to zoom in. Okay, so now it's time to frame the image. that we've just imported. So I'm going to go ahead now and go to the Layers window here on the right hand side. I'm going to click on my rounded rectangle. What I might do actually is quickly change the name of that layer just to rectangle, I think. There we go. Like so. So I'm going to basically move the rectangle layer to the very top of the layer hierarchy. Like so. And now you can see the rounded rectangle tool is on top of the image. And so now we can start framing the image. So quickly, before we start doing that, I'm going to go ahead and rasterize the rectangle layer. So right click on rectangle layer, and I'm going to go to rasterize layer, like so. Okay, cool. Okay, so because we're dealing with storyboards, it's always really important to have the focal point of the image in the very center of the shot. So I'm going to go ahead now and just transform the image I've imported. And I'm just going to shift the image using the arrow keys into the very center of the shot. Okay, so the next step is a little bit complicated, so you'll need to listen really carefully. What we're going to do is that we're going to use the rounded rectangle shape here like a cookie cutter, and we're going to punch out the image in the background. Right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead now and actually turn off the layer with the image on it. Actually, I'll just rename that layer to image. Like so. So I'm going to click on the eyeball here on the left hand side of the layer and turn the image off. Okay, so we're just left with the rectangle. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use the magic wand tool to help us select the area of the image we want to keep. So I'm going to go ahead now and go to, it's fourth down from the top. So we have the top of here of the toolbar, 4 down, and it's called the magic wand tool. So if I right click and hold on that, I get 2 options here, quick selection tool, magic wand tool. We want the magic wand tool. So I'm going to click on that. And now we're ready to use the magic wand tool. Okay, so let me show you how the magic wand tool works. We need to make sure that the rectangle layer here is selected, which it is. This is very important, so yes, make sure it's selected. Now watch what happens. I'm going to go ahead now and put the magic wand tool inside the rectangle. And before you do that, if you go up here at the top of the window, there is a little tick box that says contiguous. Please make sure that is selected, okay? If you don't select that, you'll have problems. So make sure contiguous is selected. Now if I go ahead now and select the inside of the rectangle, watch what happens. As you can see, the inside of the rectangle has been selected. Now if I click on the outside of the rectangle, watch what happens. Everything on the outside of the rectangle has been selected. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the white space outside the rectangle, like so. Okay, so now that the outside has been selected, so this is the tricky bit. Listen carefully. What we're going to do now is we're going to go and click on the image layer in the layers. Okay, like so. And I'm going to turn its visibility on, like so. Okay, so we have the outside of the rectangle selected. We have the image visible, and the image layer has been selected. So once that's all set, I'm going to go ahead now and hit backspace on the keyboard and watch what happens. Okay, like a cookie cutter, the marquee or the magic wand tool has punched out the outside of the rectangle that we don't need. I'm just going to go ahead now and go Control D to select none. And our cell is ready. So I've made my cell. So what I'm going to do now is actually turn off the rectangle and put this image here off to the side. Now what we're going to do is that we're going to repeat this process for every image that you have in your storyboard. So I'm going to show you a way of punching out these images really easily. If you have a look here, I've actually already gone ahead now and resized all the images so they fit nicely inside the rectangle, like so. And so what I can do to speed up the process is now I can go ahead to my rectangle layer, and like before, I'm going to click on the outside of the rectangle, like so. Now then, what I'm going to do is go one by one through each layer and cut out the superfluous image on the outside of the square or rectangle. So for example, if you watch this, I've got the rectangle selected. I use the magic wand tool to select the outside of the square. Now one by one I will go through each one and go backspace. Turn that off. Next one. Turn on the visibility. Backspace. Control D. And there you go, we're all done. Okay, so the images for our storyboard are now ready to lay out. So first what we're going to do is we're going to go to the rectangle layer and we're going to turn its visibility off. We don't need this rectangle layer anymore because it served its purpose. We've punched out all the images, so we can move on to the next step. So what we can do now is let's start arranging, just roughly for now, all the separate images for the storyboard. So just remember, if you go up to the left hand corner here and you click on the first tool here in the toolbar, which is the move tool, and then make sure auto select is ticked and make sure this says layer. Okay, so we can now start arranging these images. Okay, like so. Remember, this is just a rough layout. Okay, so now it's time to lay out this storyboard and make it nice and tidy. But before we can start arranging and placing these images, we want to make sure a few things are enabled before we go forward. So if we go up here to View, click on View, and go down, you want to make sure Snap here is ticked. And if we go here to Snap to, we need to make sure all of these here are selected. So Snap is ticked, and then Snap to, all of these are selected. And one more thing as well, we want to go to Show and make sure Smart Guides here is selected as well. Okay, so let's start arranging these images. So the spacing is good. Now we just want to finish laying it out on the page. What I'm going to do now is just select the bottom 4 images in my layers panel and use the arrow keys on my keyboard just to shift it down a bit, like so. Okay. And then we're just going to quickly add a guide that cuts through the very middle of the document. And it should snap. There we go. So pretty much we want to have the 4 images on the bottom and the space to the guide the same as the space to the images in the guide in the top row as well. So I'm just going to go here and like so. Do a similar thing to the top row. And then I'm going to select all the layers and just shift it all together. Like so. Looking good. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and number these images. It's pretty straightforward. We're going to go revisit the rounded rectangle tool in the menu bar on the left-hand side. I'm going to click and hold and pick the ellipse tool, like so. Okay, and now I'm just going to quickly draw a circle or an ellipse, like that. As you can tell, it's made a new layer as well. Now, the stroke of it is a little bit too thick, I think, so I'm going to put that down to maybe 3. Alright, that looks good. And then I'm going to make sure that the fill is white and the stroke is black. Okay, there we go. Now I actually want to go ahead and just rasterize that layer of the ellipse. Okay, and now we're all set to go there. So the next step is to add numbers to these ellipses. It's pretty simple. I'm just going to zoom in. I'm going to click on the text tool, which is the T. I'm going to go and click inside the ellipse and then punch in a number. With the arrow keys, I'm going to line it all up nice and neat. There you go. So now we're going to place this ellipse with a number. So let's make sure that the text layer is selected and the ellipse is selected by holding down Shift. And then I'm going to move this number into the corner of the image cell. Okay, there you go. Now the next step, which is it's a bit of a super cool feature, is now if I hold down the Alt key and click and drag on the ellipse, watch what happens. It creates a copy, like so. And we'll just lay it out there, like so. And now then, we can go ahead and repeat the process for the rest of the cells. Okay, so all my images are now nicely numbered. The next step is to add some effects to it. So I'm going to go to my image, my first image, 01, like so. And this name might be different from yours. And I'm going to go ahead now and go right click on the layer, and I'm going to go to blending options at the very top. And now I've got all these different layer styles that I can use. So for example here, I'm going to go click on stroke. And as you notice, now there's a stroke outside the image. And I can change its size like so. Here we go. I'm going to make it quite thin, so I'm going to make it maybe about 10 pixels. Okay, I'm going to click OK. Now a cool thing that you can do is that you can basically, instead of having to punch that in for every single image, which becomes tiresome, you can go ahead to the layer where you added the effect, right click, and it goes copy layer style. So I'm going to click on that and copy it. Then with the Shift key, I'm going to select the rest of the images, like so. And then I'm going to right click and select Paste Layer Style and see what happens. It's now copied that layer style across all of the images. So we're getting near the end now. One of the last steps that we need to do is to actually add text to each of the images. So I'm going to go ahead now and add some text to this first image here using the text tool, the T. I'm going to click and type in what I want to type in. So this would be fill kettle with water. Now obviously that's a little bit too big there, so I'm going to shrink it down a bit. Like so. I'm just going to line it up nice and neat. Like that. And then I'm going to repeat the process, obviously with different annotations, but for the rest of the images. Okay, so now we have each image nicely numbered and annotated. The last thing that we want to do is just to play with the color balancing on each image. You can tell that the first image is nicely balanced, but for example, the second image here has a little bit too much saturation and yellow. So we're going to go ahead now and just adjust that. I'm going to click on the layer of the second image, for example, like so. I'm going to go ahead to Image and Adjustments. I'm going to go to Hue and Saturation. Now I'm just going to mess with the saturation. So watch image number 2 when I mess with the saturation. As you can see, you can adjust it. What I want to do, I just want to bring the saturation right down. So now you can see it's more in line with the first image, like so. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with the rest. So we've made a pass with the color balancing. The last thing that we want to do to these images is to shift and change the black and white balance. Now to do this, we use a tool called Layers. So I'm going to go ahead now and click on 02, or the number 2 image. I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, and Levels. Now you'll see this window pop up here. Now below the graph, you'll see there's 3 handles: a black handle, a gray handle, and a white handle. When you shift the black handle to the right, you're basically saying, I want more black. And with the white handle, if you shift it to the left, it's basically saying, I want more white. So if you mess with that, you can see the black and white balance gets a lot more punchier. Like so. Okay? So now I'm going to go ahead and repeat that process with the rest of them. So for the final step in the process, we're just going to clean everything up a little bit. As you can tell on the right hand side of the Layers window, I now have a folder called Images, where all my images are, with their effects. I have a folder called Numbers, which has all the numbers with the ellipses. And then I have the text here as well on this folder. So the last thing we'll do is just to sort of get the spacing just right. As you can probably tell, you can see how the numbers here on the left hand side are cutting into the bleed, which isn't very good. So we're just going to shift the scale of the image to make it fit nicely on the page. So I'm going to go ahead now. I'm going to select my folder with all my text, holding down Shift button, selecting the Numbers folder and the Images folder, like so. So I now pretty much have all the elements on the screen or the canvas selected. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go Control T to transform. You'll get the transform marquee. And then I'm going to go ahead with Shift and Alt and just shrink the image just a little bit, like so. And hit enter. And there we go. Now our images are nicely spaced out on the canvas. Well, here we have our final storyboard. So thanks very much, and I will see you in the next video.